get back down to Canberra now, though, and catch up on another issue. And I'm joined by Jeff Crouch, who heads up the Australian Trucking Association. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. There's a decision being handed down your way, your industry that is, to increase your costs, federal government costs on your industry. Tell us about these costs and how heavy they'll be.
Look, they're going to be a substantial cost, Chris. The tax that we pay in fuel is currently at 25.8 cents per litre, and that is what we consider to be an existing overcharge. Now, the trucking industry has got no issue whatsoever for paying for the roads to be built, got no issue with paying for the roads to be maintained. What we do have an issue with is paying more than our fair share, and we've got existing data published by the National Transport Commission, which quite clearly states that the Australian trucking industry is already overpaying our fair share by $189 million a year. We're happy to pay what we need to pay. We're happy to do our fair share, but not 1 cent more.
You're talking about a 2.5% increase in your diesel tax, aren't you? I mean, that's pretty much inflation or thereabouts. It's not a significant increase.
Well, it is a significant increase, I'm afraid, Chris. Diesel is the biggest cost input that any trucking company has. Most trucking companies run around about 30 to 35% of their cost base is on diesel. You're going to increase that by 2.5%. You're materially eroding the viability of those trucking companies. Those trucking companies have simply got no choice but to pass it on, and they'll have to pass it on to their customers. And those customers are the ones that are going to be selling the goods to the mums and dads right across Australia, putting foods onto their table.
You're also looking at a 2.5% increase in registration fees, I'm told. All this has come down from higher increases that were suggested. I mean, nobody likes increases, but as you say, surely you'll just pass on all these costs to consumers. And if they're running at about inflation, I wouldn't have thought too many people would complain too much. Never mind, I know, of course, in your industry the margins are squeezed and you have a lot of competition, I suppose.
Well, Chris, inflation is one thing, but if I can just remind you of the statement I made at the beginning, our industry already pays $189 million more than we would need to pay. CPI is fine, inflation is fine if it was at a level playing field in the beginning. We're already behind the 8 ball. So our message to the federal government, our message to the parliamentarians is use up that $189 million extra that we're already paying now, that we've paid for many, many years, and then we can come back to the table and then start talking to us about any proposed increase.
This is really the start of a long-term debate, isn't it? Because there's a lot of talk about road user charges. There's a lot of talk about trying to get more freight onto rail rather than roads, and part of that is always going to be squeezing the trucking industry economically to try and make rail transport more attractive. And there are all sorts of reasons to try and do that, to get trucks off our roads for road safety, probably to reduce emissions as well.
Look, the truck industry we have today is the cleanest it's ever been. We've got data that already shows that the air that comes out of a modern Euro 5 truck engine is cleaner than the air that goes in, particularly in metropolitan areas. And as far as rail versus road, both modes of transport have their place in the Australian freight landscape. The road transport industry is the most efficient and viable way of getting product from point A to point B. To try and squeeze it any more than it already has done is simply not reasonable under any circumstances.
So where do you go from here? You've ended up with lower increases than originally proposed. You're still very unhappy with them. Do you just have to cop it, or are you going to try and campaign for something else?
Well, we're certainly not going to cop it, Chris. Our campaign is going to be for zero increases. We already pay more than what we have to pay. The federal government, in their re-election campaign, campaigned on a platform of no new or increased taxes. This is an increased tax, and this announcement flies directly in the face of what their pre-election commitment was.
I suppose one issue that's going to be increasingly raised, it's not a big issue now, although some people are talking about it, and that is electric vehicles. A big push to get more electric vehicles onto the road. Of course, they then don't use petrol, don't pay excise, don't contribute through that mechanism to road maintenance and the like, whereas you, of course, your industry is hit heavily for that very reason.
And that's exactly why the trucking industry supports the reform discussions that are going on as far as road user charging is concerned. We need to take into consideration that there are electric vehicles on our roads now. We need to take into consideration the percentage of electric vehicles over the course of the next years, over the course of the next decades, is going to increase exponentially. They don't pay any contribution to the road infrastructure that we have through petrol excises and taxes, and there needs to be a complete overhaul to take that into consideration.
Maybe if there was a road user charge on electric vehicles, you wouldn't be hit with a diesel and registration increase.
Well, by the same token though, the trucking industry is also one that very quickly adopts new technology. We're extremely innovative, and where there are electric light trucks or even heavy vehicles when they come onto the market, I've got no doubt that our trucking industry will embrace those and continue to be the good community citizens they are and make a contribution to a good environment as much as possible.
Jeff, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.